Did Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England, really murder his own nephews, the princes in the Tower? Or was he the victim of one of history's greatest smear campaigns? For over 500 years, this question has haunted historians and captured the public imagination. Today, we're going to dive deep into the evidence, the suspects, and the conspiracies to uncover the truth behind this enduring royal mystery. Let's set the scene. The year is 1483. King Edward IV, a charismatic and powerful ruler, dies unexpectedly, leaving his 12-year-old son, also named Edward, as the heir to the throne. The young king, now Edward V, and his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York, are placed under the protection of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. This is where things start to get complicated. Instead of preparing for his nephew's coronation, Richard of Gloucester took a series of shocking steps. First, he intercepted the young king on his way to London and had key members of the Queen's family, the Woodvilles, arrested. Then, he moved the two princes into the Tower of London, which at the time served as both a royal residence and a secure fortress. Initially, this seemed like a standard procedure to ensure the boys' safety before the coronation. But the coronation never happened. Instead, a clergyman named Ralph Shah delivered a sermon outside St. Paul's Cathedral, claiming that the late King Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid. Why? Because he alleged Edward had a pre-existing marriage contract with another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler. If this were true, it meant that all of Edward and Elizabeth's children, including the two young princes, were illegitimate. And if they were illegitimate, they couldn't inherit the throne. The next in line, you guessed it, their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Within days, Parliament passed an act called Titulus Regius, which formally declared the princes illegitimate and offered the crown to Richard. He was crowned King Richard III on July 6, 1483. The two boys, Edward and Richard, remained in the Tower of London. They were seen playing in the gardens occasionally during the summer. But by late 1483, they had vanished completely. They were never seen alive again. So, what happened to them? The dominant theory, popularized by none other than William Shakespeare in his play Richard III, is that Richard ordered their murder to secure his throne. This version paints Richard as a ruthless, power-hungry tyrant who would stop at nothing to wear the crown. Shakespeare's portrayal is so powerful that it has defined Richard's image for centuries as the archetypal villain. The Tudor dynasty, which defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth field just 2 years later, had every reason to promote this story, by painting Richard as a child killer. The first Tudor king, Henry VII, legitimized his own questionable claim to the throne and united the country behind him. Historian Thomas More, writing under Tudor rule, provided a detailed and gruesome account of the murder, claiming the boys were smothered with their pillows by two of Richard's henchmen, Miles Forrest and John Dighton. This narrative held sway for centuries. It seemed open and shut. Richard had the motive to eliminate rival claimants. He had the opportunity, the boys were in his custody. And he had the means, he was the king. But in recent decades, a growing number of historians, often called Ricardians, have challenged this traditional view. They argue that Richard III has been the victim of a masterful character assassination. Let's look at their arguments. First, they point out that there is no direct contemporary evidence linking Richard to the princes' deaths. The most detailed accounts, like Thomas More's, were written decades later by men loyal to the Tudor regime. More was only a child when the princes disappeared. His information was second-hand at best, and likely influenced by Tudor propaganda. So, if Richard didn't do it, who did? The Ricardians have a prime suspect, Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. Buckingham was initially Richard's biggest supporter, helping him seize the throne. He was handsomely rewarded with land and titles. However, just a few months later, Buckingham led a massive rebellion against Richard, a rebellion that aimed to place Henry Tudor on the throne. Why the sudden change of heart? The theory goes that perhaps Buckingham himself murdered the princes, hoping to frame Richard and destabilize his reign. Maybe Buckingham believed that with the princes gone, he had a better claim to the throne himself through his own royal bloodline. When Richard refused to go along with his ambitions, Buckingham rebelled. It's a compelling theory. Buckingham had access to the tower and a strong motive. Richard ultimately crushed Buckingham's rebellion and had him executed for treason. But the damage was done. And then there's the main beneficiary of the prince's disappearance, Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII. When Henry invaded England in 1485, the fact that the princes were presumed dead worked massively in his favour. If they had been alive, many Yorkist supporters would never have flocked to Henry's banner. Some argue that Henry had the strongest motive of all. He could have had the princes secretly killed after he took the throne to eliminate any chance of a Yorkist restoration. This theory suggests that the boys might have survived Richard's reign, only to be murdered later. After all, if Richard had killed them, why didn't he produce the bodies to quell the rumors that they were still alive? These rumors fueled several rebellions against Henry VII, led by impostors claiming to be one of the lost princes, like Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck. If Richard had proof of their deaths, it would have strengthened his position, not weakened it. And what about physical evidence? In 1674, nearly 200 years after the princes vanished, workmen at the Tower of London discovered a wooden chest buried under a staircase. Inside were the skeletons of 2 young children. They were assumed to be the lost princes and were given a royal burial in Westminster Abbey by order of King Charles II. In 1933, these bones were exhumed and examined. The analysis concluded they were the remains of 2 boys whose ages matched those of Edward and Richard. For many, this was the final proof of their murder. However, the scientific methods of the 1930s were limited. Modern historians point out that the examination could undefinitively date the bones or determine the cause of death. We can't even be 100% certain of their gender without modern DNA analysis. Today, those bones remain in Westminster Abbey. And requests for further DNA testing to compare with known relatives have so far been denied by the royal family and the Church of England. Without that crucial scientific evidence, the case remains circumstantial. So, where does that leave us? We have a king, Richard III, with a strong motive but no direct evidence against him, whose reputation was systematically destroyed by his successors. We have a treacherous ally, the Duke of Buckingham, who had his own ambitions and rebelled against Richard. And we have the ultimate victor, Henry Tudor, who gained the most from the princes' deaths and had every reason to ensure they never reappeared. The mystery of the princes in the tower isn't just a cold case, it's a story about power, propaganda, and how history is written by the victors. Richard III could have been a monstrous child killer, just as Shakespeare portrayed him. Or he could have been a loyal uncle, framed by his enemies and slandered for centuries. The evidence is ambiguous, leaving us with tantalizing clues but no definitive answer. What do you think? Was Richard III a villain, a victim, or something in between? Let me know your theories in the comments below. History is rarely black and white, and this is one mystery that continues to fascinate and divide people to this day. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next historical investigation. See you next time.